Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai. Despite this famous tagline, we are seeing aggression on LAC. This is happening for the first time after 1977. What is the reason behind this? What is the reason behind the recent skirmishes in Galwan Valley? Is there much more than what meets the eye? Is it because India has become a prominent nuclear nation? Or is it because India is reclaiming its land to carry out infrastructural activities? To understand more on this, a seminar was organized on Tuesday, 3rd March 2020 on India-China relations in 21st century, challenges and opportunity. It was organized by Center for Advanced Strategic Studies, Center for China Analysis and Strategy, in association with India Council of World Affairs and Maharashtra Education Society, Pune. This seminar was also organized to commemorate the 160th year of Maharashtra Education Society. It was held at MES Auditorium, Pune. Shri Gautam Bambawale, former ambassador to China, expressed his views during the seminar.
Well, a very good afternoon to all of you, and this is the most difficult of all the sessions because all of us, including myself, have eaten a lot of that good food and I think we are a bit drowsy, but let me try waking you up by narrating an incident which happened to me in Delhi. I was with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama told me that, look, Gautam, when you negotiate with the Chinese, and I was doing a lot of negotiations in those days with the Chinese, do not talk to them on things like highways and expressways and fast speed trains and high speed trains. Talk to them about issues like human rights. Talk to them on issues such as morality. Talk to them on issues such as freedom of religion. And the reason he said that was because if you talk to them on these so-called soft power issues, you will find that they're immediately on the back foot and your negotiation with them goes well. So I think what His Holiness the Dalai Lama was trying to convey was something very, very serious, but he did it in his own inimical way, which was in a very jovial way. So let me try to address, why it is that the organizers have put this whole segment of Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong together in one. And I would have even added Taiwan to it. And the reason for that, I think, as all of you understand, many of you are students of international relations. And of course, we also have serving and retired military officers and others here. But the reason why this group of subjects has been put together is because together they represent what we call the soft underbelly of China. What exactly does this mean? What do I mean by saying this is the soft underbelly of China? I mean that these are the fault lines of China. These are the areas which are China's trouble spots. And if India has to counterpunch, and I don't mean counterpunch in a military way, ladies and gentlemen. I mean counterpunch in a geostrategic or in a diplomatic manner. These are the areas that you have to look at. These are the places that you have to counterpunch in. And therefore, this afternoon session is very, very important because these are the soft spots where China is concerned. These are the fault lines of China. These are the trouble spots of China. Let me start, because I've already spoken about His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and let me start by saying that Tibet and Xinjiang, of course, are two large geographical provinces of China, but they are also provinces where there are minority people. And by minority people, we mean that they are not Han Chinese. As you know, the population composition of China is almost 98% of China's population are Han Chinese. Whereas in Tibet, you have the Tibetans, and in Xinjiang, you have the Uyghurs, who are basically Muslims. Now, Hong Kong is slightly different from Tibet and Xinjiang, and so too, of course, is Taiwan, because I'm going to refer to it at the very end of my presentation. But Hong Kong and Taiwan are different because in those places you have Han Chinese who are resident there. But having said that, let me start by talking a little bit about Tibet. As all of you know, and I'm not going to go into facts and figures because I think all of you are aware of it, but there has been over the last 40 or 50 years a large scale, and this has accelerated in the last 10 to 15 years, there has been a large scale resettlement of Han Chinese people from other parts of China into Tibet. And today, the Han Chinese population in Tibet province of China far outnumbers the Tibetans themselves. And this is one of the problems that you find in Tibet. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who is revered, he is the current 14th Dalai Lama, who is revered by the Tibetan people, is almost outlawed there. For example, photographs of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama, are not permitted to be shown not only in public places but also in private homes. No prayers are to be offered to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and so on and so forth. But the really important point is what I made first, that the large-scale settlement of Han Chinese in Tibet has led to a situation where the Tibetans themselves are outnumbered in their home province. And they are not allowed to freely they're not allowed to freely worship their Dalai Lama. They're not allowed to freely practice their religion. They're not able to freely practice their own culture. And this has become a point of great concern for Tibetans. And this is where and why, from time to time, there are even violent eruptions in Tibet, and particularly in the capital city of Lhasa. What the Chinese have done in return for the resettlement of lots of Han Chinese in Tibet is that they have built up the infrastructure of Tibet. So you have spanking new highways or expressways running across Tibet. You have many new airports which have been built. Connectivity to Tibet has improved. And of course, you also have a railway line which runs all the way to Lhasa and into Tibet. But the reason for these is to enable people whose origins are in other parts of China to come and settle in Tibet, to work there, and to go back to their homes when they need to. There's a lot of dissatisfaction for all these reasons amongst the Tibetans. And the question that many ordinary Chinese ask is that, look, the Chinese government and the Chinese people have done everything in their power to improve the standard of living of the people in Tibet. And so the reaction of an ordinary Chinese person to the dissatisfaction of the Tibetans is, why are they dissatisfied? Their standard of living has increased. Their children actually have the ability to go to schools and get educated. So why is it that they're dissatisfied? But the reason that they're dissatisfied, of course, as we all know, is because they're not able to practice their own religion and culture in their homeland. So that's a little bit about Tibet. Let me say that, and this has been said earlier, that India's position on Tibet is that it is a part of the territory of the People's Republic of China. But also don't forget that for the last 50 odd years, India has been the home not only to His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, but also to 100,000 other Tibetans who came with the Dalai Lama and who continue to come to India even now to live and work here. So India is one of the biggest countries which has accepted not just the Dalai Lama, but also a whole lot of Tibetans. So I think, in my opinion, that yes, we do have a kind of card. Whether it's a trump card, I'm not 100% sure. We can discuss that if there are any questions on it. But we do have a card in our hand, and I think, it doesn't make sense to give up this card especially 50 years after, or more than 50 years after His Holiness the Dalai Lama came to India. So that's what's happening in Tibet. Let me move on to Xinjiang, because Xinjiang is almost exactly the same as in Tibet. The people there, of course, the local people are the Uyghurs, and they are mainly Muslims. We heard earlier, and all of you have been reading that what the Chinese have done there is that there is a major crackdown which is on the Muslim residents of Xinjiang province. There are huge internment camps in which they have been lodged, and there is a huge police kind of crackdown, or a security crackdown on the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Once again, the Chinese have done exactly what they did in Tibet, which is they have resettled a whole lot of Han Chinese from other parts of China into Xinjiang. At the same time, they have developed infrastructure, and but I think the Uyghurs have been put down with a much more iron fist and iron hand than has happened in Tibet, where too, of course, the Chinese authorities have cracked down in a major manner. The point I'd like to make about Xinjiang is that, there are many countries across the globe who give us lectures on Jammu and Kashmir. All of them are silent when it comes to Xinjiang and the situation there, maybe with the exception of maybe one or two. The Organization of Islamic Conference, or the Organization of Islamic Countries, is completely silent on the situation in Xinjiang. They don't dare speak up on it because they're afraid of what will happen to their relationship with China, because that relationship in turn is of great benefit to those countries. So I'd just like to close on Xinjiang by saying that those who from the rooftops give us lectures are very quiet when it comes to what is happening to the Muslim population in Xinjiang. Let me take a little bit of time on Hong Kong and the large-scale protests there. I think all of you have been reading about it. I don't need to go into step-by-step kind of description of what has happened in Hong Kong. But let me say that the ongoing protests, or the protests which went on for a very long time, almost 9 to 10 months in Hong Kong, took, I think, the Chinese leadership by great surprise. They didn't realize that there was so much trouble under the surface in Hong Kong. They didn't realize that there was so much discomfort and dissent amongst the people of Hong Kong, whom, as I had told you earlier, are not minorities, who are not Tibetans or Uyghurs, but they are the same Han Chinese, like 98% of the rest of China. So, as you know, in 1997, Hong Kong's sovereignty reverted back to China, and China had promised the United Kingdom at the time of this handover of sovereignty, and in the basic law which was written for Hong Kong, that for 50 years there would be no change in the political and economic system of Hong Kong. But what has upset the people in Hong Kong is that in the last few years, definitely over the last 7 or 8 years, there have been political changes taking place in Hong Kong which impinge on the freedom and prosperity of the people there. And therefore, they're protesting these changes. They don't want to change the basic nature of Hong Kong, which is a free, open, transparent society with democracy of a certain kind, not what we understand as democracy in India, where every person has a vote, every person over 18 has a vote, but it's a slightly different kind of democracy. But there have been certain things which have been done over the past few years which even restrict that limited democracy in Hong Kong. And the younger people of Hong Kong particularly see this as an affront, they see this as a danger, and they were the ones who rose up in these protests which went on for a very, very long time. I'd like to make just 1 or 2 points on the protests itself. One is that the Chinese PLA has been readied to go into Hong Kong, but has not been used at all, has not been allowed to go into Hong Kong, though they are across the border in the border areas in mainland China, just across from Hong Kong. But only the Hong Kong police have been used, but they have increasingly been more violent and have used more violent tactics against the protesters, and to a certain extent that has also extended the protests. I'd also like to mention, because I think all of you have read about this, there have been also a whole lot of subterranean forces which have been used, including what is known as the Hong Kong Mafia or the Triad gangs to against the protesters. So it has been a very murky and a very long drawn protest. But the point I would like to make here is that let me go back to the start where I said that this is the soft underbelly of China. And if we have to counterpunch, we have to counterpunch in these areas. So I'm a bit surprised that the government of India has not spoken up for democracy in Hong Kong, like the US government has spoken up, like the UK government has spoken up. I think one of the factors which always weighs on people's minds in office in India, in Delhi and other places in India, is that if we try to, let's not try to wake a sleeping dog, let him lie, because they're afraid that if we put some pressure on China, they're going to in turn put pressure on us in Jammu and Kashmir. But my point here is that they're already putting pressure on us in Jammu and Kashmir. After Article 370 was abrogated, as all of you know, the Chinese have been working at the UN Security Council with Pakistan, trying to put pressure on us. So my question to the government of India is, what are you waiting for? A long time ago, while the protests were at their height, they are now tapered off a bit because of the coronavirus problems, but we should have made a strong statement about democracy in Hong Kong. And in that way, at least diplomatically, and once again I want to underline, by counterpunch, I don't mean a military counterpunch. General Bakshi, you know that I don't mean a military counterpunch. I mean a diplomatic and a geostrategic kind of counterpunch. And finally, let me say a few words on Taiwan. That if all these are the soft underbelly of China, the thing which gets under Taiwanese skins under Chinese skins the most is Taiwan. So anything we do with Taiwan is going to upset the Chinese a great deal. And for that very reason, I would recommend strongly that we should have a much stronger relationship with Taiwan than we have today. It need not be a political relationship in terms of prime ministers and so on, but it should definitely be an economic and a cultural relationship. If we are selling Hindi Bollywood movies in China, I think we should be selling them in Taiwan also. And let me just end with one example, a practical example from my experience of how we did something with Taiwan which really got under the skin of the mainland Chinese and the Chinese government. You know, China has their embassy in Delhi, and they have two consulates, one in Mumbai and one in Calcutta. The Taiwanese have what we call a trade office in Delhi, and we permitted them about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, to open a kind of consulate, a smaller office in Chennai. The mainland Chinese people came to us, the Chinese ambassador came to us, protesting this move, saying that, look, the PRC, the People's Republic of China, doesn't have an office in Chennai, and how can you permit the Taiwanese to open there? My answer to him was, yes, I know that. And what I left unsaid was that is exactly why we have allowed the Taiwanese to open in Chennai, because we knew it would get under your skin. Thank you very much.